The designation appeared in the National Hurricane Center's Tropical Weather Outlook at 8 in the morning on a Thursday, buried in the second paragraph of a technical document that most people who are not meteorologists or weather enthusiasts would not know how to read and would not be reading at that hour regardless. Invest 90L. 2 words and a number that mean, in the formal language of Atlantic tropical meteorology, that a specific area of disturbed weather in the Atlantic basin has been assigned an identification number for the purpose of investigation, that it is being actively monitored by reconnaissance assets and satellite systems, and that it has demonstrated enough organization to warrant the kind of systematic attention that precedes, in a meaningful percentage of cases, the formation of a named tropical storm. The designation does not mean a hurricane is coming. It does not mean the disturbance will develop at all. What it means, and what the public that lives in the potential path of whatever this system becomes needs to understand as clearly as possible and as early as possible, is that a process has begun, and that the time between the beginning of that process and the point at which its outcomes become fixed is the only time that preparation is possible. This video exists because that time is now. Not because Invest 90L is certainly going to become a major hurricane, not because the models are showing a locked track toward a specific coastline with a level of confidence that the science of tropical meteorology does not actually produce at this stage of a system's development, but because the atmospheric and oceanic conditions surrounding Invest 90L at the time of this recording are conditions that the historical record associates with rapid and significant tropical development, because the window between now and the point at which this system could be affecting land areas in the Gulf of Mexico or along the Atlantic seaboard is short enough that the preparation decisions that matter most need to be made before the forecast has the certainty that most people wait for before making them. And because the record of what happens when people in the path of developing tropical systems wait for certainty before preparing is a record that this video is not willing to be complicit in repeating. We are going to walk through what Invest 90L is, what the environment it is developing and looks like, what the models are showing and what they are not showing, and what the people who are in any reasonable range of its potential track should be doing right now while the forecast is still uncertain rather than after it is not. The Atlantic Basin in the late summer and early fall operates under conditions that meteorologists describe using the term main development region, a band of warm tropical ocean water stretching roughly from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean that serves during the peak months of the Atlantic. Hurricane season, as the primary nursery for the tropical systems that go on to threaten land areas across the Gulf Coast, the Atlantic seaboard, and the islands of the Caribbean. The conditions in the main development region in any given season determine, more than any other single factor, how active that season's hurricane activity will be and how intense the systems that develop within it are capable of becoming. What the sea surface temperature measurements and upper-level atmospheric analysis available at the time Invest 90L was designated were showing is an environment that sits at the more dangerous end of the range of conditions the main development region can produce. Sea surface temperatures along the disturbance's likely track were running between 1 and 3 degrees Celsius above the climatological average for the date. Wind shear values, the measure of how much the wind speed and direction change with altitude in the atmosphere above the disturbance, values that high shear inhibit tropical development and low shear allows it, were in a range that operational forecasters describe as conducive to development, and the mid-level moisture content of the atmosphere along the projected path, the presence of dry air being the other primary inhibitor of tropical intensification beyond wind shear, was in a range that offered less resistance to development than the average environment in the basin at this time of year. None of these conditions individually guarantees that Invest 90L will develop into anything significant. All of them together describe an environment in which, if the disturbance's internal dynamics can organize themselves into the kind of coherent circulation that tropical systems require before they can begin, drawing energy efficiently from the warm ocean beneath them, there is relatively little in the surrounding environment that would prevent the system from intensifying. This is the distinction that matters most in understanding what the designation of Invest 90L actually means for the people who need to pay attention to it. The question is not whether the environment will support development. The environment will support development. The question is whether the disturbance itself can achieve the internal organization that allows it to take advantage of that environment. And that question is one that the models address with varying levels of confidence, and that the reconnaissance data collected in the coming 24 to 48 hours will go a long way toward answering. In the meantime, the environment is set, the ocean is warm, the shear is low, the moisture is present. What Invest 90L does with those conditions is the only remaining variable. And it is a variable that has historically, in environments like this one, resolved more often than not in the direction of development. The global forecast models that meteorologists use to project the future track and intensity of tropical systems are tools of genuine sophistication and genuine limitation. and understanding both is essential to using their output responsibly. The American GFS model and the European ECMWF model, which are the two primary global models that operational forecasters rely on for medium-range tropical guidance, were showing at the time of Invest 90L's designation a spread of solutions that reflected the genuine uncertainty of the situation. Some model runs were showing development into a tropical storm within 72 hours, followed by continued intensification as the system moved on a track that would bring it toward the Gulf of Mexico within a 5 to 7 day window. Other model runs were showing less organized development, slower intensification, or tracks that would keep the system farther east and to reduce the threat to the Gulf Coast. The ensemble products, which aggregate large numbers of individual model runs to produce a probabilistic picture of what is most likely to happen, were showing a cluster of solutions weighted toward development and a general track toward the northwestern Caribbean and eventually the Gulf, but with a spread wide enough that the specific area of highest risk could not yet be identified with the confidence that would allow a precise forecast to be issued. This spread is not a failure of the models. It is an accurate representation of the genuine uncertainty that exists at this stage of a tropical system's development, and it is information that the public needs to receive and process differently than it typically does. The instinct, when a forecast shows a range of possible outcomes, is to wait until the range narrows before taking action, on the theory that preparing for an outcome that does not materialize is a waste of resources. This instinct is understandable, and it is dangerous. The range narrows as the system develops and the forecast window shortens. But the actions that matter most for safety, specifically the decision to evacuate from surge-prone areas, require a lead time that extends beyond the point at which the forecast will have narrowed enough to satisfy most people's threshold for certainty. By the time the track and intensity forecast is specific enough that the people in the highest risk areas feel confident about the need to act, the window for the preparation that would actually protect them has already partially closed. This is not a theoretical problem. It is a documented pattern in the post-storm analysis of every major hurricane landfall event in the historical record, and it is the pattern that the early designation of Invest 90L as a system of concern is specifically intended to give people time to avoid repeating. The storm surge threat that a well-developed tropical system poses to coastal areas in the Gulf of Mexico is the piece of the hurricane risk picture that the public consistently underestimates relative to what the science shows it should be. Wind speed is the metric that hurricane coverage focuses on. The category number is the shorthand that the public uses to assess danger, and neither of these is the primary driver of hurricane fatalities in the modern era of storm warning and evacuation infrastructure. Storm surge is. The dome of ocean water pushed ahead of a major hurricane can reach heights of 10, 15, or in extreme cases more than 20 feet above normal sea level, and it can penetrate miles inland from the coastline, moving at speeds and with a force that makes survival outside of substantial elevated structures effectively impossible. The Gulf of Mexico is particularly vulnerable to extreme storm surge events because of its specific geography. The shallow slope of its seafloor along much of its northern coast amplifies surge heights compared to what the same storm would produce on a steeply sloping coastline, and because the orientation of the coast relative to typical Gulf hurricane tracks means that storms making landfall in certain areas approach at angles that maximize the surge they push ahead of them. The people who live in surge-vulnerable areas along the Gulf Coast and have not yet thought carefully about what Invest 90L means for their situation need to do two things in the next 24 hours, before the forecast has the specificity that their instincts are telling them to wait for. The first is to determine, specifically and concretely, whether their home and their neighborhood are in a designated storm surge inundation zone for their county or parish, and if so, what category of storm would be required to produce inundation at their location. This information is available from every county and parish emergency management office along the Gulf Coast, most of which have interactive surge zone maps on their websites that allow a specific address to be checked against the inundation modeling. The second is to make a prior decision about the surge height or storm category at which they will evacuate rather than shelter in place. A decision made now, before the emotional dynamics of watching a storm approach make clear-headed decision-making harder, and a decision that, once made, they commit to acting on when the forecast reaches the threshold they have set. The preparation that does not involve evacuation also has a timeline that is shorter than most people account for when they begin thinking about it. The materials required to protect windows and doors from major hurricane winds, specifically plywood, impact-resistant, shutters, and the hardware required to install them, are available at normal retail quantities right now in the days before a potential storm has a name or a forecast cone. They will not be available at normal retail quantities 48 hours after. Invest 90L becomes a named storm with a forecast track pointing toward land. The fuel required for generators, vehicles, and chainsaws is available now at normal prices with normal wait times. the non-perishable food, the water storage, the prescription medications that a multi-day post-storm period without power or supply chain access. Demands are all available now in a way that they will not be once the preparation surge that accompanies a high-confidence landfall forecast sweeps through the communities and the projected impact area simultaneously. Every hour between now and the point at which Invest 90L's development and track becomes specific enough to drive a high confidence forecast is an hour in which the preparation that matters can be done without the friction that the high confidence forecast will produce. The meteorologists and emergency managers who spend their professional lives working on tropical weather systems share, as a professional community, a specific frustration that the people in this video's audience deserve to hear described plainly. The frustration is not that people do not take hurricanes seriously enough in the abstract. Most people who live in hurricane-prone areas have a healthy respect for what major storms can do, built from personal experience or from the vivid collective memory that coastal communities carry of the storms that have shaped them. The frustration is that the respect people have for major hurricanes in the abstract does not translate reliably into early action in specific situations, because the specific situations always look at the stage when early action is most valuable, like situations that might not require action at all. Invest 90L looks right now like a disturbance. It looks like something that might develop and might not. It looks like the kind of thing that has appeared in the tropical weather outlook before and gone nowhere. And if you have been watching the Gulf for long enough, you have seen that happen many times. The meteorologists watching Invest 90L are not telling you it is certain to become a major hurricane. They are telling you that the environment it is developing in is one that the historical record should make you take seriously before you have the certainty you are waiting for. Because the certainty and the preparation window are not going to overlap in the way that your intuition suggests they will. What the satellite data and the reconnaissance flights and the model guidance are going to show in the next 48 hours will tell the story of what Invest 90L is becoming. That story may be one of rapid development into a serious tropical threat moving toward populated coastlines. It may be one of a system that fails to organize and dissipates without becoming anything that requires a response. It may be one of something in between. The science does not know yet, and anyone telling you they know is telling you something the science does not support. What the science does support, with the full weight of every post-storm analysis conducted after every major landfall event in the Atlantic Basin's modern recorded history, is that the time to act on the possibility of a serious storm is before the possibility becomes a probability, and the time to act on the probability is before the probability becomes a certainty. And by the time a certainty exists, the actions that would have mattered most are the ones there is no longer time to take. Invest 90L is a possibility right now. It is a possibility developing in an environment that is arranged to support it. What you do with that information in the next 24 hours is the only part of this situation you have any control over, and that window is open right now in a way that it will not be later.